духом, поручик Голицын, корнет Оболенский, налейте вина, не падайте духом, поручик Голицын, корнет Оболенский, налейте вина. А где-то уж кони проносятся к яру, ну что загрустили, мой юный корнет, а в комнатах наших сидят комиссары и девочек наших ведут в кабинет, а в комнатах наших сидят комиссары и девочек наших ведут в кабинет. Над доном угрюмый идем эскадроном, на бой вдохновляет Россия, страна. Раздайте патроны, поручик Голицын, корнет Оболенский, седлайте коня. Раздайте патроны, поручик Голицын, корнет Оболенский, седлайте коня. Ах, русское солнце, великое солнце, корабль император застыл, как стрела. Поручик Голицын, а может вернемся? Зачем нам, поручик, чужая земля? Поручик Голицын, а может вернемся? Зачем нам, поручик, чужая земля? תודה רבה. השיר הזה באמת קוראים פרוצ'יק גליצין במשפט. הוא מספר על in English actually, so yes. Okay, this is a song called Porучик Голицын. It's about the war between the white and the red in 1917. And it says that the soldiers are fighting and the war is something really bad and the white are losing and they're standing on the shores of Russia and they had the chance to escape to France on ships. But these two soldiers, Porучик Голицын and Obolensky, this is the two names, one of them says to the other, I prefer to stay because I prefer to be in Mother Russia than in other land, even if it means death. So this is something very melodramatic and very Russian. Thank you. Let's go.
Heard that you had some troubles at the airport.
Yeah.
We're very sorry.
No,
I would like to apologize to my country.
Not at all. In the end, we became good friends, even with the security officer who was detaining me. So we wound up exchanging stories about Israelis and Iranians being good friends for thousands of years.
And then what happened? You get detained.
No, and then he let me go.
Ah.
They know. I think our peoples know. It's not the government, not the people.
Yes.
Yes.
We're very happy that you've made it. You broke free and that you've arrived here with us.
Thank you.
I would like to first apologize for my hoarseness. I'm a bit chilled. And for any mistakes that I make in English. I'm here with a translator and an author who speaks 10 languages, so I'm feeling a bit self-conscious, but I hope I'll be able to sail through. My name is Noah Mannheim. I'm head of Hebrew literature in Kineret Morabitan Publishing House, and I'm a columnist for Haaretz newspaper. and I'll be your host for this lovely, not quite evening yet. And I'll be introducing my two comrades here. But first, I wanted to remind you who we gathered here to talk about. He was a translator, a French teacher, a tennis instructor, an author of crossword puzzles and chess problems, a researcher of butterflies. He was also a Russian immigrant in Berlin and in Paris and in the United States, where his literary career finally took off in 1955 when he published Lolita. And then, of course, speaking of Vladimir Nabokov, who his life was ended in Switzerland in 1977. So close. You know, I heard you talking about how close you felt to him because he died such a short while before you were born. I was like, I missed it by such a few years. Yeah. So Vladimir Nabokov is one of the greatest authors in any language, and he is in the center, in the heart of our guests, Lila Azam Zanganeh, sorry, The Enchanter, Nabokov and Happiness. And the book was published in 10 languages, 12 languages by now. Wow, they printed the booklet, I think, 2 weeks ago. You're very quick. But sadly, it hasn't come out in Hebrew yet. I hope that this evening might be the beginning of a change in that direction. Lila was born in Paris to Iranian parents, and she taught literature, cinema, and languages at Harvard University. You also published literary reviews, essays, in many countries, including United States. And with her to talk to me about Nabokov and about language and memory is the poet and translator Sivan Beskin. She was born in Lithuania, and among other things, many other things, she's a member of the literary review Ho and a business analyst, which maybe you can explain to us what the connection is later in the evening. What is business analyst has to do with poetry. And as I said, the artistic side will be covered by our members of the Cultural Brigade. So, do you need a few more minutes, or should I fire away?
No.
No.
I'm full. I'm wide awake.
Excellent. So while you're awake, can you tell us why Nabokov? Because a lot of people like him. I think maybe some of the people sitting here love him very much as I do. And not all of them go and study Russian just out of admiration to an author. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit about it.
Yeah, I think part of the beginning of the adventure is really falling in love. It's like you fall in love with a text, with the quality of a text. You feel that the text is talking to you in a way that feels very much like home. I remember a friend of mine talks about psychic incandescence. And there's something of that incandescence when I started reading Nabokov. I felt he was talking about a universe that I knew, and not just because he was talking about Russia and nostalgia, although of course being in exile twice over was something that brought him very close to me. I became an exile twice over. I was in Iran just once in 1977. I was a month old. I was born in France, but I grew up in a milieu where with only Iranians, and all they would ever talk about was what happened, why did this revolution happen, what country did we leave behind. So as I sat there listening to a country that I didn't know, I created for myself an imaginary country. And I think Nabokov, although of course he knew Russia, with memory, he talks about the fact that the Russian Revolution was a syncopal kick he would never have missed for worlds. And so he was exiled to Germany first. His wife was Jewish. They had to escape a second time. They left on a boat to escape the Nazis, whom they really escaped by a whisker. His own brother died in a concentration camp. I exiled myself again to the United States and so on. So it's not interesting for me necessarily to compare our lives, but there was definitely something in the quality of his nostalgia, of his relationship to the past, of memory, of his mother. My mother's memories are very similar to Nabokov's memory in northern Russia. My family had very close connections also to Jewish people all around the world, in Iran and elsewhere, just as the Nabokovs did. So all those things came together, but really it was the incandescence of language. And I just felt that he has a connection to the world that is very much related to light. everything, he sees everything shimmers and glimmers and glitters in a way that is completely marvelous. And only Homer, I've only seen Homer see the world quite in that way. And I think maybe that was the entry point. And my book mainly is about that light as an entry point into the world.
Sivan, can you tell us a little bit about how you met Nabokov? Not in the flesh, but on paper.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, that's a crazy story because, of course, I grew up in still Soviet Lithuania until 1990, which is also the year when Lithuania declared its independence. But still we had still all of the Soviet restrictions during my childhood. So, of course, Nabokov was totally out of limits. I mean, nobody knew back then about Nabokov. And then once I took a book, one of my father's books by Arthur C. Clarke, a science fiction writer, American writer, a book that had been published in the early 60s with all kinds of weird predictions, like by the year 2000 we have colonies on Mars, all that kind of stuff, and completely overlooked the communications and computing revolution. But at some point in this book, he said, it was, of course, a Russian translation of this book, and then he goes, if we had this and that, maybe Lewis Carroll would have given us Lolita instead of Alice in Wonderland. So now the Russian translators and editors had to give an annotation, what's Lolita? Because nobody knew anything about Lolita. So they gave this annotation. Lolita is a vulgar, cheap novel by an American writer, Nabokov. They distorted even his name because they really didn't want their readers to know that that guy was actually Russian and we had something to do with him. So it took another couple of years until I actually, I remembered that because I remembered like everything when I was 10. And it took another couple of years until I went straight into the school library in Israel, in the kibbutz where I grew up later. And I took this Lolita. And
they had Lolita in the school library in the kibbutz.
Yeah, in English. Yeah, absolutely.
Very advanced.
Yes. So, and then I read it and I went like, oh my God, that's what he meant. I mean, that's the Alice. That's the pseudo Alice, And
so you're nostalgic for Nabokov even before you've read anything.
Exactly. I don't know if nostalgic is the word, but yes. I mean, I was like longing for finding out what that vulgar, cheap novel was.
Well, now you know. Do you think it's vulgar anymore?
Well, no. And it's actually vulgar is like a key concept for Nabokov, maybe, with all his thoughts about what he calls poshlost, which is sort of a vulgarity of bourgeois vulgarity. So I think from the very beginning that was the key.
But Alice is also really present in Lolita and in all of Nabokov. And in fact, the first book that Nabokov translated from English to Russian was Lolita, was Alice, and which he called Anya, I think, Stranye Chudes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
Which means.
In a strange land, right?
Anya in the strange land. In strange land.
He thought it was remarkable, and all through in Ada, but a lot in Lolita. It's full of Alice references. Full. He's walking. Humbert at one point. He hits his nose against the mirror, and he's driving on the wrong side of the highway. There's all these metaphors about desire, being about driving on the wrong side, on being on the other side of the mirror, which is for me what Nabokov is in large part about. It's about desire.
And do you feel that there is, or what do you feel is the difference between his writing in English and his writing in Russian?
Unfortunately, I studied Russian for many years and very seriously. My Russian never got so good that I could read Nabokov in Russian. Though I want to, when I'm finished with this book, I intend to go back to Russian to be able to read it better. But the things that I've read in translation, I like his Russian novels less, as far as I'm concerned. I find them tighter. Thank you. He was more concerned. I think he was still younger. He uses a lot of inversions. He had a very happy family. And it's as if the younger Nabokov thought that literature should be very dark. So he goes and does a lot of, when you read the Brian Boyd biography, you see that it's about these weird characters and they're cruel and they're unpleasant. And Mary is very autobiographical, his first book, and it's quite lovely. But I love his his American novels because that nostalgia helps him. And the switch in the language, it's not really that he's writing in English. He's writing in an idiom that he almost invents, really. The same way that in Ada he invents Kennedy and Esoti and a new geography. He invents a new lexical geography, which is completely enchanting. For me, every sentence I read and reread and reread, and it feels it takes you on these new rivers, these new maps, these new colors. And I find his themes in the American books much more alluring. He's always thinking about going to the end of desire, transgressions. He's trying to think of these spaces of transgression, which I think is one of the fundamental themes of art, really.
Sivan, as someone who creates in a language which was not your language, your mother tongue, what do you feel is different if we're talking about transgression of these boundaries? Do you feel that you're having to reinvent your language anew when you're writing in Hebrew?
Well, not anymore, but because of course I started writing very early, and as a result of that, I did have to switch the language of my art at some point, which happened much like years after I had been living here and living in Hebrew. I switched my whole life into Hebrew. Now, this idea of using a different language was never quite strange to me, even before everything happened, even before the immigration, before everything, because I grew up in Lithuania, and Lithuania in the 80s, when I grew up, it was quite multicultural still. It's not this way today, but I heard constantly more than one language in my childhood. So actually acquiring another language and using it for art was quite clear to me, because it was like, okay, now I live here, and I have friends here. I really want my friends to know what exactly I'm doing, so I'll use the language which they can read. And actually, it was something very easy and personal for me, in a way. So in that way, I think maybe it's similar to what happened to Nabokov and other writers that did something similar with immigration, because they knew their next creation language before they immigrated, before everything happened to them. So, and in Israel, it's not a big deal. I mean, practically all the Israeli classical writers and poets who wrote in Hebrew, it was not their mother tongue. Like Leah Goldberg wrote in her fifth language approximately, and nobody asked if it's strange or unusual. So
that's because I wasn't there. That's because I wasn't there. If I was there, I would have asked her.
Absolutely, yes. but like everybody asks me that, ever since I started publishing. So maybe it's not just you personally. It's just the short-term memory.
I wanted to carry on with this switching languages theme, because Nabokov was also a translator, and he hated women translators. He claims
he hated women. He was I love Nabokov, and a lot of people dislike him at a distance. I think he was probably a lovely person, extremely gentle. He was very loving with his wife. His letters to his wife are the most beautiful love letters I've ever read, and they're now published by Penguin Random. Although Judith Thurman of The New Yorker disagrees with me because she wrote a pretty negative piece, and she thinks that he's too like googie googie, poochie poochie. But she
Love men like that. What is that?
yeah, and she says he's boring in his correspondence, but he's not posturing. He's really writing to her, and he always calls her my happiness and dushin kamaya and a million things. I think it's a beautiful correspondence, and he gives a lot of details about his life, but apparently she wanted those details. She wanted to know what he ate, what he wore, who he saw, and so on.
It's her fault.
It's
her.
well, but they had an extraordinary relationship. They really, really did, and I think he was quite a remarkable person in many ways, even in his personal life. When it came to certain ideas like that, he was very old school. Now he was definitely homophobic. And he says, I'm clearly homosexual on. He says, I'm clearly homosexual on the subject of translators, which means he only wanted men. But as all writers, Nabokov also was a big liar. He lied. He has 5 different versions of how he met his wife in Berlin on a bridge, and she was wearing a wolf mask, and she knew all his poetry. It sounds very romantic, probably untrue, and that she didn't remove her mask and recited his poems and won his heart. And he was very sought after in Berlin. And then, so, when he said that he hated women translators, in reality, he was using at least 2 women translators whom he loved. He said he hated lady writers, and finally Edmund Wilson convinced him that Jane, good old Jane Austen, was a good writer, and so on and so forth.
That is old school.
He was very old school on those topics, unfortunately. But he himself was a good translator, and he thought he had always wanted, when he switched from Russian to English, it was so painful for him, and he always thought that he would go back to Russian. Obviously, he wrote all these American books, thinking that someday he would go back to Russian. When it was time to turn Lolita back into English, to Russian, he said that he realized that he thought that he held the keys to a garden that had always been in bloom for all those years, and he went back to the garden and he saw that the gates had rusted, and the key was this big, what they call it, like a crowbar, and that he could no longer open the door. It was all rusty and rusted, and he realized that English really had become his language. And I love that idea, which in English you call molting, right? Like the skin who changes his scale. And in fact, somehow, by integrating another language, you become that other language. So that's why I agree with you that the questions become irrelevant. You choose a language, like using the cello. You practice the cello for 40 years. It's very difficult to go back to the violin.
So this is a perfect point, and you just gave me the perfect opportunity to let you listen to 2 parts of the same song, part of it in Russian and part of it in Hebrew. And I would like to invite Alex and Shmuel back.
Темная ночь, только пули свистят по степи, только ветер гудит в проводах, тускло звезды мерцают. В темную ночь ты, любимая, знаю, не спишь, и у детской кровати тайком ты слезу утираешь. Как я люблю глубину твоих ласковых глаз, как я хочу к ним прижаться сейчас губами. Темная ночь, и тревожная черная степь пролегла между нами.
תינוק מנמנם לצידה ודמעות בעיניים.
ветер гудит в проводах.
צץ כוכב בשמיים, אהובתי.
Ты, любимая, знаю, не спишь.
ותינוק מנמנם לצידה.
Ты слезу утираешь. Как я люблю глубину твоих ласковых глаз. Как я хочу к ним прижаться сейчас губами. Темная ночь, любимая нас.
ערבה חשוכה כי תהום
Пролегла между нами.
So this was Dark Night, Lila Fell, and we're talking about translator. It was translated by former parliamentarian Yuri Edelstein. I think being a parliamentarian in Israel is enough work as it is, but I'm very happy that he found the time to translate this beautiful song as well. And I was listening to this song and I was thinking how strange it was that I didn't understand anything at the beginning. It was like a total maze for me. And then suddenly the words made sense because it became a language which I recognized. And I was wondering in what way both of you think that language shapes our identity and the feeling of self that we have, because you have 7 languages under your belt, and you have 3 or 4?
Like 3 fully and 3 more like partially.
Okay, so with my 2, I'm feeling disadvantaged, but I'm wondering how you feel about the way that it has shaped your identity and continues to do so.
You start. I have mine. Okay. Well, I think it's more than a form, more than the language itself. What actually forms the identity is the literature written in it, or translated into it. Like all the translated literature that I read in Russian or in Hebrew or in English or whatever are part of that culture to my mind, because that the translator actually performs sort of transition of the book into his own culture, into the culture of his readers, and expands it.
So when you're, I'm just clarifying, so when you're translating a book, you feel like you're not only translating the story or the plot or the characters, but you're transferring the culture itself from the culture of origin into the culture of destination.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's immigration. The story's immigrating while translated.
Exactly. Like I'm expanding the cultural world of my readers here in Israel, the Hebrew readers, so they can somehow widen the definitions of what it means to be a Hebrew person, a Hebrew reader, you know. So that's why I object all kinds of boundaries, you know, cultural boundaries. I don't really believe that there exists such thing as a really strange culture. What is strange to me actually is the absence of culture, you know, because if we have culture, we have all means to expand it as wide as we need, and that's what a translator does, among others. That's what I feel like I'm doing when I translate books from Russian or Lithuanian or English into Hebrew, or and that's what I think is the real significance of translation.
Yeah, I love that idea. I agree with you completely that texts migrate, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's so important. And as we experience literature, what's extraordinary is that we also become all those characters. And as we become those characters, our Erasmus has a beautiful line about how our heart must always become wider and wider, which is something that is also in the Bible, something that one of my favorite writers, Marguerite Yourcenar, wrote in her beautiful book Opus Nigrum, and she's actually written on her grave, which I went to visit in Maine. She says in French, plaît à celui qui est peut-être d'élargir le cœur de l'homme à la mesure de toute la vie. So may it please the one who perhaps is God to widen the heart of man at the measure of all of life. And I think really that's what literature does for you. So the more you can read other people's literature, other texts, other cultures, other countries, again, it's about a lexical geography of the mind. For me, it's the only ethic. It's really an aesthetic. It's when something becomes the entirely beautiful, where we can empathize with each other and mirror each other, not just as cultures, but also as men and women. And regarding your question specifically for language, I think it's very connected. I was lucky. I was born speaking 3 languages, which was French, Persian, and Italian for various reasons. And then I learned English very late, and then Spanish, and Russian, and finally Portuguese. And I intend to learn. If I could live 1,000 years, I would learn others. I've always wanted to learn Hebrew. I would love to learn Japanese. I would love to learn Sanskrit. And part of the thrill of knowing these languages is that I myself then can become somebody different all the time. In a different language, you become different. First, it's poetic in and of itself to be able to know the world in multiple languages. If I know how to say this tree, or its specific name, for one thing, but just to name tree in 7 different ways or 10 different ways, I can come closer to its essence, right? There's something sacred, as we know, about naming things. And as you name, and you come closer to the mystery of its existence. And then also for language itself, as you talk, you realize yourself. For all of you, I'm sure you speak multiple languages. If you speak Hebrew, you have a certain. If I say "Ani medaberet ivrit," I will start in a certain way. If I say "Mais je sais, je peux parler français," immediately I will be somebody different. And I love that. And it's also the thrill for me of culture is not just something solipsistic. It's also the possibility to bridge the gap all the time. I was born an Iranian child growing up in France. I was born in Paris. I speak like a French woman. But for the French people in France, I was always seen as the Iranian, the foreigner. And it's been always interesting to me to be able, I would speak Persian with my parents on the streets, and everybody would stare at us. They knew it wasn't Arabic, but they didn't know it was Persian, so they would always think, are you speaking Hebrew? Are you speaking Turkish? And we'd be, no, I'm Iranian, but I'm French too, I was born here. So I developed a passion for learning languages and trying to speak them so perfectly that I would fit in everywhere. And that I would switch like Romain Gary. Romain Gary was Polish, and he has this beautiful memoir where he's speaking Polish and he's insecure about speaking Polish in France. And these French people are starting to, these Polacks, blah, 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 and they're playing pool. And he turns around and he says, in my most purest French, I insulted them in the purest French. And I often feel like Romain Gary switching from one language to the next. Then you become a spy. Then you're starting to live stories. You become to live the stories of literature yourself. Where I'm sitting in Rome trying to put on weight because I had lost so much weight for some reason, and I was eating all these Nutella croissants. And these Russian people next to me saying, like, God, this girl, she's eating so much. How many of these is she going to have? So finally I look at them and I say, возьми, пожалуйста, would you like one? And they were shocked. And I love that. All of a sudden, the other becomes not so much the other, and they can't look at you in the same way either. So that experience of exchanging positions, of living the life of another, you live more lives as you make the effort of learning their languages. And I love it more than anything in the world.
My mother always, when my mother and father are abroad, she always, uses words like, "Ameltsara ze idiot." And my dad goes, that's the same word in other languages too. He can understand you. Don't use that word. We have other words for that. And I think it's fascinating that you speak about learning languages in order to be a kind of spy or a chameleon where you can blend in wherever you want.
It's my dream.
It's your superpower.
But it's my dream to be a spy.
I think you just blew your cover in front of all these people.
I know. I shouldn't say this in public, but because I speak many languages, many people are always asking me, "Do you work for the Mossad?" So and it's always
not the worst. It's not the worst option.
It's never the MI6 for some reason. It's always the Mossad. Always. Oh, I've been asked dozens of times.
It's because you can pass for an Israeli.
I know.
Yes.
I know.
Yes, definitely. More than me, I think. But you made me think about words that are not transferable. I mean, can you think about words in the languages that you know that have no equivalent in any other language?
Any other or something more specific? Because I have a reverse story.
Okay.
You know, like everybody who speaks Russian knows that there is no word in Russian for privacy, because there is no privacy if you're in that kind of
There's
society.
no word in
now.
Hebrew for tact.
Absolutely. Yes. Now, you know, I have my almost 8 years old daughter. Her Russian is very, very basic because she's not really growing up with the Russian, but he picks up here and there, and she's interested. So once she like went to take a shower, and then she said, I'm making like a Russian-speaking evening now. So she just tried to speak Russian for the whole evening as much as she could, not so much. And then he goes like, then her little brother comes in, and he goes like, go out of here, I need some. Oi, they don't have, how do you say privacy in Russian? then I explain to her like what everybody knows. There's no word for privacy in Russian.
But is it true or is it just a myth?
Huh?
Is it true or is it just a myth?
No, it's true.
It's true.
Absolutely true. No word. So and she just somehow immediately, you know, she never really lived in that culture except for, you know, occasional cartoons. And she immediately somehow understood it. She went like, okay, I'm going to solve this problem. You know, when I really know Russian, I'll invent a word for them. I feel pity for them. They have no privacy. So
It would take a revolution.
Absolutely. I count on her.
Lila?
Yeah, I can think of many words that have no equivalence. My favorite new one that I just discovered is a Brazilian word, and it actually has African origins. It's called cafuné. And cafuné is when you massage somebody's head with your fingers. It's a very lovely
word
word.
for that.
And there's a word for that. And cafuné, and it's basically, and there's a whole art of cafuné, and cafuné is really delicious. But there's only, and somehow only you can explain it. Massage sounds disgusting. Any other word seems inappropriate, but somehow cafuné gives a perfect, there's a very sentimental loveliness attached to it. And I love the fact that it comes to Brazil via Africa.
And in Iranian?
In Persian?
In Persian?
Yeah,
sorry.
in Persian, there's many words. Also, the funny thing is my mother comes from the north of Iran, so she also knows the dialects of northern Iran, which are very connected to the ancient Persian languages. So as you may know, we have this very unusual situation in Iran. We're actually not an Arab country. We are an Indo-European people, and we speak an Indo-European language, except we were invaded by the Arabs in the 7th century, so we got their alphabet. But so we have an unusual situation that we have an Arabic script, but with an Indo-European language.
It's like Yiddish,
It's
where you
like-
write it in Hebrew, but it's
Exactly.
partly German.
Exactly. So we have many words that resemble Russian, French, Latin, and so on. But in the northern languages, you have more things that sound that are unusual. So you have these wonderful little things like oh, it's terrible. You would say hazara marg or things like that. And my mother always says, don't say these things because no Iranian will ever understand you. So I love the idea that within one language you have these margins of the language that remain secret. So I love it. It's infinite. I think I believe that magic exists, and I believe that's why I'm reading this wonderful book by Peter Cole right now called Poetry of the Kabbalah, which is an extraordinary book published by Yale University Press. And if you believe that magic exists in this world, it is indissociable from words. It is entirely contained in words, the way we use them, and the way they connect us, in the most powerful ways.
This is where we're going to end up in paradise, which comes from the Persian word that's also in Hebrew for pardes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
PRDS, I know, it's in the
Yes.
Bible too.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're going to end up in a place where all languages are understood and each contributes its words that no other language has. A vision of a reverse Tower of Babylon, where we can all climb up it and know each other's language, and barriers will be able to fall. We're actually nearing the end of our lovely evening. It's getting chilly, and we have to be prompt because there's going to be a reception where you're sitting so comfortably now. But I couldn't let you all go without at least one quote from Nabokov himself. And I'll try not to entangle my tongue. I liked, as I still like, to make words look self-conscious and foolish, to bind them by mock marriage of a pun, to turn them inside out, to come upon them unawares. What is this jest in majesty? What is this ass in passion? How do God and the devil combine to form a live dog? And I think part of the reason I love this quote is because it holds so much of the playfulness that is always there in Nabokov's writing, even when he starts writing about the darkest subjects or dealing with the most complicated of things and the deepest of passions. There's always a sense that he is molding and shaping and playing with language. And I know that for many years he struggled with his writing in English, but the writing itself is effortless. You don't feel any struggle. And if there is a struggle, he is harnessing all this strife to create a prose that is completely translucent and brilliant, like a diamond. It's like you were talking about the clandestinence of the light, and it shimmers.
Translucent. It is.
Yes, it really shimmers off the corners of the diamond. And to wrap this evening up, I wanted to ask both of you, what is the thing that you love to do most with the languages you know? Is it singing lullabies, or rhyming, or shouting at your husband? How do you like to play with the languages that you know?
Well,
Simone is laughing. She has an answer. Yes.
I thought about it because I like play. What this whole idea of play is very close to me. Now, what I always wanted to do as a Hebrew poetry writer, does it work at all? Yeah. Okay. As a Hebrew poetry writer, was always like to do in Hebrew things that I'm familiar with in other literatures that are not so common or not so common anymore in Hebrew. So I went into doing all kinds of assonances, crazy rhymes, like rhymes between words that come from different languages, and combining them all together in one piece, in one poem. Stuff like that. I think that's what I like the most. So, not everybody likes rhyming these days, but I think I have a very good case for it. So I really enjoy it.
I love singing. I've been singing for a long time, since I was 17, mostly classical music. But I love singing in various languages, and I know
Opera in Italian.
Opera in Italian. Yeah, I don't speak German. French singing is less interesting. As my mother says, when you have the ear of a foreigner, most French songs sound like a lament. It's very whiny. And I know. I've always known Yerushalayim Shel Zahav.
You've always known it? Who taught it to you?
My best friend growing up was Jewish, so we spent a huge amount of time together. And she taught me many, many things, prayers and Yerushalayim Shel Zahav.
I'm fighting with myself here not to ask you, right here, right now, sitting in front of the walls of Jerusalem. Come on. You brought it up. You brought it up.
ירושלים של זהב ושל וחוד של ושלוך הלא לחוד שירה אני קינו ירושלים של זהב. I don't know if my words are right. Yeah.
Perfect.
ושל וחוד של ושלוך הלא לחוד שירה I'm nervous. שירה אני קינו.
I have chills up and down my spine now. I think in every word possible, in every meaning possible, this evening could not end on a better note. Lila, Sivan, thank you so, so much. Thank you for listening and for coming, and enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you so much.